everyone, welcome to Constructed Chaos. Today we're talking about the Ranger's transformation from absolute zero to broken hero, and how you can become the badass adventurer you were always meant to be. So, I know what you're thinking. Isn't the Ranger one of the worst classes in the game? Well, the 5e Ranger gets a bad reputation for some of the initial design missteps from the player's handbook. In addition, many weren't initially fans of how the Ranger steps on the toes of the Rogue, the Fighter, and the Druid all at the same time. At first glance, one might think that there isn't much individually special about the Ranger. But the class has received some much needed buffs from Xanathar's Guide to Everything and Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. And some of those changes have opened the door for some truly powerful builds that rival some of the best in the game, all while giving us a better image of what a Ranger should be. So then, what are they? Simply put, Rangers are experienced adventurers. They've spent their whole lives honing survival and tracking skills that allow them to make their way through the harshest of environments. More than anything, their wisdom is what sets them apart from other classes. The best Ranger builds make use of a culmination of abilities and spells and clever preparations that make this class one of my absolute favorites to roleplay. So then, what do Rangers care about in terms of stats? Well, your highest score should probably be your dexterity to make use of ranged and melee weapons, with wisdom as a close second for your spells. A high constitution score can also go far in building an effective Ranger, even though we already have a beefy D10 hit die. This will help you to maintain concentration on spells and abilities, and you'll see why that's so important in just a moment. From there, your strength and intelligence should probably outpace your charisma to some degree, since Rangers are usually less concerned with people and more concerned with survival in the wilderness, though you could always make a case for something else. After all, the Ranger comes with a lot of skills and proficiencies that makes them pretty versatile. You'll have proficiency in light armor, medium armor, and shields, strength and dexterity saving throws, 3 chosen skills from animal handling, athletics, insight, investigation, nature, perception, stealth, and survival, and literally every weapon in the game. You'll also have the opportunity to start out with either scale mail or leather armor, 2 short swords or 2 simple melee weapons, a dungeoneer's pack or an explorer's pack, and a longbow with a quiver of 20 arrows. But really, who keeps track of arrows anyway? As for your race, you may want to choose something like a Variant Human, Aarakocra, Tabaxi, or a Wood Elf to boost the stats that you need. But as usual, I'll opt to choose the optional rule from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything that allows me to assign my racial bonuses as I please, giving me the chance to choose some more interesting choices with more unique flavor and abilities. And speaking of those optional rules, let's talk about the all-important changes to Ranger that I mentioned earlier. Just use the optional class features. Don't use the stuff from the player's handbook. Just don't. Trust me. At first level, your Ranger gets the first iteration of the Deft Explorer feature, which replaces the old Natural Explorer feature, which was pretty situational at best and outright useless most of the time. This first bit, called Canny, allows you to double your proficiency bonus for any one skill and grants you 2 additional languages of your choice. The rest of this feature is unlocked at 6th and 10th level, so we'll touch on those when we get there. Favored Foe also comes online at first level and replaces the old Favored Enemy feature that, again, was far too situational to be truly useful in most builds. Instead, when we hit a creature with an attack, we may mark them for up to a minute or until we lose concentration, as if concentrating on a spell. Many have gripes about that last part, and I can understand why. A lot of the Ranger spells do require concentration, so we're a bit limited in our options here, but it's still a vast improvement and free damage when you're not concentrating on something else. Marking a creature in this way allows you to deal an extra 1d4 damage on each of your turns the first time you land a hit on that creature, including the turn it begins. That damage also scales with you as you level, becoming 1d6 at 6th level and 1d8 at 14th level. And you can use the ability a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus, regaining all uses when you finish a long rest. At first level, 1d4 of extra damage every single turn can add up to be quite a lot, making the Ranger pretty potent compared to other classes right out of the gate. But we haven't even gotten to our spellcasting yet, and we don't have to wait long. At 2nd level, we get access to 2 first level spells from the Ranger spell list, along with 2 first level spell slots. As usual in my class guides, this will be the last time that we mention spell slots and spells that we gain per level, but I'll mention a few important options that you may want to consider. Zephyr Strike is a staple at low levels and actually still somewhat stacks with Favored Foe even though it requires concentration. Absorb Elements can be a great defensive option for a class that doesn't do much with its reaction as it is. Goodberry is a fantastic use for any extra spell slots before taking a long rest for some extra healing. Spike Growth and Plant Growth in tandem can make for some really great battlefield control. Conjure Woodland Beings actually gives us access to a pretty broken combo wherein pixies we summon cast Polymorph and Fly on the party. Swift Quiver gives us 2 ranged weapon attacks as a bonus action that notably isn't tied to taking the attack action on our turn. And Steel Wind Strike makes for some absolute badass damage dealing with a free teleport at the end while leaving our concentration free for other things. And if we're playing with the optional class features, that list will be expanded into some other notable entries such as Entangle, Aid, Revivify, Summon Fey, and Greater Restoration. The addition of these extra spells is huge for the Ranger. Revivify alone makes the class much more viable in a party setting, allowing you to fill the role of an emergency healer if the cleric goes down unexpectedly. As for when you'll get access to that stuff, here's a list of spells known and spell slots corresponding to your Ranger level. And yes, that does mean that the Ranger is a spells known half-caster as opposed to a spells prepared half-caster. Really, this just means that you'll lose a bit of versatility here and you'll want to be sure about the spells you choose as you go along. Although I'm sure your DM wouldn't have much problem if you change your mind later on. But spells aren't the only thing we get at 2nd level. Here, our Ranger will also unlock a fighting style, choosing from Archery, granting a +2 bonus to attack rolls with ranged weapons, Defense, giving us a +1 to AC while wearing armor, Dueling, which gives us a +2 to damage rolls with a single melee weapon when we are wielding no other weapons, and 2-weapon fighting, which allows us to add our ability modifier to the damage of a second attack we make when using 2 weapons. Personally, my pick would be the Archery fighting style as I feel it's best suited to the Ranger, but Defense and Dueling can be great options too, if you're making a more melee-styled attacker. Sadly, even after all the buffs to Ranger, 2-weapon fighting is still pretty underwhelming, but that's a much larger issue that lies outside of this class, and we'll save that for another time. But thanks to Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, we'll also gain 3 other fighting style choices that are all very viable for effective combat gameplay. Blind Fighting gives you 10 feet of blind sight and allows you to see invisible creatures within that range as well. Druidic Warrior gives the Ranger access to 2 cantrips from the Druid spell list, making this one of the only options for cantrips as a half-caster. And Thrown Weapon Fighting allows you to draw a thrown weapon as part of an attack and grants a +2 bonus to the damage using those weapons that you throw. These new options are certainly a welcome change and offer a lot of room for more creativity in building a truly broken Ranger. In particular, blind fighting on a Gloom Stalker Ranger is one of my favorites. Speaking of Gloom Stalker,
hey, you subscribed yet? While you're down there, hit the like button. Do it.
Finally, at 3rd level, we'll gain our Ranger archetype subclass. Let's take a brief look at each option now, but I'll leave the finer details for some future videos that I'll add links for as I make them. To kick things off, we'll start with the Beastmaster, which is notably one of the first subclasses we had access to in 5e. Although, it's far from the best subclass for Ranger. In fact, it's often regarded as one of the weakest and most problematic. The subclass relies on a beast companion that you use to fight alongside you during your initiative and using your own action economy for the most part. This wouldn't be so bad if the creature was strong enough, but most times they feel far more fragile than they should. But luckily, things have changed since it was revised in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. Without delving too far into the math that I'm sure to go over in a later video, the subclass now allows you and your beast to make a combined 5 attacks in a single turn, with your beast adding your proficiency bonus to its AC, damage, and attack rolls. It's still not the best subclass for Ranger, but there are even some notable combos that use spells like Entangle to restrain enemies while your Beast of the Air attacks up to 4 times per turn with advantage. By contrast, a fairly recent entry that many thought might come as an even further fix to the aforementioned subclass, we have the Drakewarden. While the official release of this subclass wasn't quite as potent as expected, it still offers a lot of badass flavor and some abilities that make this option one of my personal favorites. As you might expect, you'll basically play the role of a Beastmaster, except with a Drake that you can also use as a mount. You'll get some pretty cool abilities such as resistance to a chosen damage type, a breath weapon, and even flight in later levels. There's a lot to love about this one, and I'll have to hold myself back from going over absolutely everything here. Now we take an inquisitive look at the Fey Wanderer. As one of the newer entries from Tasha's, this Ranger archetype is one of the more potent. Using an innate Fey magic that you've acquired, you are able to channel the best and worst parts of the Land of Fairies in the form of spells with a flavor of charm and trickery, and extra psychic damage on your attacks. You might think that this would be the only choice for your Ranger that requires a high charisma score, but you'll be instantly granted an ability that allows for the use of your wisdom modifier when you make charisma-based checks. And you'll also gain access to great spells like Charm Person, Misty Step, and Dimension Door that all still use your wisdom modifier. Slipping out of the spotlight and into the shadows, it's now time to talk about the Gloom Stalker. I mentioned this one earlier, and for good reason. It is hands down the most broken Ranger subclass, especially when accompanied by the right fighting style, feats, and spells. Using the power of darkness for ambush tactics and surgical assassinations, this version of the Ranger is outrageously potent at all levels of play. To start, you'll get a bonus to your initiative, some extra movement speed, and an extra attack on your first turn, granting you the opportunity for some silent executions or at least massive damage at the start of combat. And to aid in that task, you also become effectively invisible to creatures that would need dark vision to see you, thusly granting you advantage on all your attacks. This subclass even gives you access to greater invisibility at later levels, which will make your Ranger a massive looming threat in combat that's really hard for enemies to deal with. And if you happen to miss, no worries, your 11th level ability allows you to try again once per turn. I could go on and on and on about this one. It does everything you want and more out of a build like this, and that's even before you take a feat like Sharpshooter or Crossbow Expert. Seriously, this thing is about as broken as it gets. Also found in Xanathar's Guide to Everything, we definitely can't forget the Horizon Walker. This subclass is one of the best available to the Ranger, though not quite as strong in terms of damage as the Gloom Stalker. More than anything, the Horizon Walker is full of extraplanar flavor and utility and has a focus on traveling the multiverse and using their innate understanding of planar magic to vanquish foes and assist allies. Specifically, they gain access to some great spells like Haste, Banishment, and Teleportation Circle in later levels. And as early as 3rd level, you can even convert your weapon damage into force damage once per turn, adding a little bit of extra damage in the process. The subclass also scales very well as you get some other nifty planar abilities for extra attacks, teleportation, and damage resistance as a reaction. Now, we'll move all the way back to the player's handbook again for the Hunter. And as it was with the Beastmaster, this subclass leaves a lot to be desired mechanically. What is good about this option is that it allows you to pick and choose from a list of benefits as you advance through the abilities and features, so it does offer quite a bit of customization. Some of those abilities are certainly useful, such as Hordebreaker, which allows you an extra attack once per turn when you land an attack on a different creature with the same weapon, and Volley, which allows you to make a ranged attack on any number of creatures within 10 feet of a point you can see within range. But many of them are laughably bad, such as the 7th level ability that just gives advantage on saving throws against being frightened, or Uncanny Dodge at 15th level, which rogues get 10 levels sooner. Don't get me wrong, Ranger is a fantastic class, and this subclass can be usable if you give it a shot, but it's definitely one of the worst available to you. Moving back towards the stellar subclasses found in Xanathar's, we have the Monster Slayer. If you've always wanted to play a badass hunter of evil creatures like Van Helsing or The Witcher, this is your subclass. While not quite as potent as the other two subclasses from Xanathar's, the Monster Slayer can still hold its own, especially during combat against a single epic creature. In addition to some helpful spells like Zone of Truth, Banishment, and Hold Monster, the Monster Slayer also gets abilities that allow it to learn the effects of different damage types against an enemy, deal extra damage to a target once per turn without using concentration, and deal out special counterattacks and thwart spells in certain situations. All in all, though a bit clunky, this subclass can hold its own if given the right conditions to do so. And last in our list of archetypes available for Ranger, we have the Swarmkeeper. These Rangers use a magical connection to nature to conjure a fleet of tiny spirits to assist them in adventuring and combat. The appearance of this swarm can be flavored however you see fit, from bees to pixies, and has a ton of room for just about any idea you might have. And in similar fashion, the swarm's mechanical ability covers a lot of ground as well. They give you access to great spells like Web, Gaseous Form, and Insect Plague, plus the Mage Hand cantrip that is entirely made up of the swarm itself. They grant you some very versatile abilities that trigger on successful attacks once per turn for extra damage, moving yourself, and moving your enemies, even knocking them prone at later levels. There's a lot to love here, even outside of the fun flavor. In large part, we owe just as much of the Ranger's improvements to these new subclasses as we do to the revised options for the base class, and I have to go on record to say that I'm personally very happy about these new options, since Ranger has always been extremely appealing to me. But we're not done yet, so let's get back to the other feature we get at 3rd level alongside our Ranger archetype. Primal Awareness essentially replaces yet another fairly situational ability with even more spells. We'll get Speak with Animals at 3rd level, Beast Sense at 5th level, Speak with Plants at 9th level, Locate Creature at 13th level, and Commune with Nature at 17th level. Granted, these might not be super useful in combat, but part of this ability allows us to cast each of them without spending a spell slot once per long rest. This alone serves as a massive improvement to the Ranger and further implies their experience and handiness in exploration and adventuring situations. Finally, moving on from 3rd level, we get an extra attack at 5th level whenever we make the attack action, which is pretty standard for most martial classes, and we'll get access to the roving portion of our Deft Explorer ability at 6th level, allowing us to increase our base movement speed by 5 and gain a climbing and swimming speed equal to that walking speed. I should point out that this is quite a valuable skill even in combat for a class that is often focused on taking full advantage of the surrounding terrain by attacking from afar, setting traps, and using other creatures to fight for them. Next, we'll get the Land Stride ability at 8th level, which allows us to move through non-magical difficult terrain without taking extra movement or any inherent damage from thorns, spikes, or similar hazards. But even further, we'll have advantage on saving throws against plants that are magically created that impede movement, which might even come in handy when we need to move through our own spells. At 10th level, we'll get the last of our optional Ranger features from Tasha's called Nature's Veil. Compared to the old Hide in Plain Sight feature that it replaces, this is also a massive improvement. A number of times equal to our proficiency bonus, we can use a bonus action to become magically invisible until the start of our next turn. I was a little bothered at first that this didn't last as long as the invisibility spell, but it didn't take long for me to realize that this might actually be a better option for the Ranger. For one, it fires off as a bonus action, allowing us to become visible, do something, and then just vanish again. It also doesn't require concentration, like so many other features for this class. Also at 10th level, we'll be granted the final portion of our Deft Explorer feature called Tireless. This will allow us, as an action, to give ourselves 1d8 plus our Wisdom modifier in temporary hit points. We can do this as many times as our proficiency bonus per long rest, which is a pretty hefty boost considering we already have a d10 hit die. But what's arguably better is that we can remove a level of exhaustion upon completing a short rest. While this might not get used often in every campaign, it is pretty significant. Exhaustion is a huge problem for characters in 5e, so much so that having even one level of exhaustion can be detrimental. Having the ability to just remove exhaustion so easily can make the Ranger a massive asset in long dungeon crawls and adventures in hostile territory. We don't get another base class feature called Vanish until 14th level. which only allows us to hide as a bonus action and says we can't be tracked by non-magical means unless we choose to leave a trail. And then, 18th level sees us gain access to one of my favorites from the original Ranger of the Player's Handbook. Feral Senses allows us to fight creatures that we can't see without having disadvantage on our attack rolls. It also allows us to become aware of any invisible creature within 30 feet of us. While this does come online fairly late, I do feel that it's far more useful for this more broken version of Ranger than the old one, allowing us to make use of our multiple attacks and extra damage mechanics on creatures that we can't even see implies that, for example, even enemies outside of our range of vision aren't safe. We can snipe down enemies from a max range with ease, especially with a feat like Sharpshooter. And finally, we arrive at Foe Slayer, our capstone 20th level ability. Once on each of your turns, you can add your wisdom modifier to the attack roll or the damage roll of an attack you made against one of your favored enemies. Although Ranger has seen many broken improvements, this one is still pretty lackluster. I'd imagine that you would most often use it to ensure that your attacks land since you have so many abilities and spells that stack extra damage atop of them, but at most your wisdom modifier will be a +5, so it could be a good idea to multi-class out before this point for some extra spells or maybe even the rogue's sneak attack. But even without that multi-class mix-up, we now have a vastly improved Ranger in 5e that's capable of some truly broken feats. But maybe you're still not convinced. Maybe you've still got a bad taste in your mouth from the Ranger of old. If so, don't hesitate to let me know what I got wrong in the comments below. And while you're there, fire a shot at the subscribe and like buttons so you don't miss any of our other D&D content we've got on the way. And until next time, go out there and make some chaos.